All right, House Speaker Mike Johnson says he's moving ahead with a plan to vote this week on the Senate-approved budget resolution, despite reports of opposition from some of Republicans in the House. In fact, yesterday we had the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, Andy Harris, saying he's not for it, which I think is representative of many in the Freedom Caucus. The House Speaker can only spare 3 votes. How will he be able to move this forward for a vote tomorrow? Or could it take longer? Here to discuss the latest is Suzanne Bowdey, editorial director and senior writer for The Washington Stand. Suzanne, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks, Tony.
All right, give us the latest.
Well, if anybody tuned in yesterday, I hope you did. You heard from Andy Harris about the Senate, which over the weekend passed its version of budget reconciliation framework. Now, if you've been listening to the show, then you know that both chambers of the Capitol right now are trying to come up with a plan. It's really like they're trying to write the rules for a game they haven't played yet. And the big game is, how do we do the federal budget? How do we do tax cuts? What are the floors for spending offsets, the debt ceiling, Trump's tax extensions? They're trying to come up with a plan to go at this to see what they can do. And the two chambers have very different ideas about what should be done. On the Senate side, what they passed is objectionable to a lot of the House members, largely because the floor for spending cuts is so low. If you heard Andy Harris yesterday, he said, we're coming at it from a floor of $2 trillion worth of spending cuts. And you hear the Senate saying $4 billion with a B, which is a drop in the bucket, many House conservatives think, into what they should be doing with
that's almost a rounding error when you consider the size of the budget. So House Speaker Mike Johnson, as repeatedly we've seen him when he's been at these tight points, he's kind of pulled out the Trump card. And today he did the same. He had the President Trump met with the House Freedom Caucus and some others. How did that go?
Well, I think they hoped it had gone better than it did. After the meeting, there was a readout that said a lot of the more hardline conservatives were still not in favor of the Senate plan. They don't think that it cuts deep enough. I know that Ralph Norman had concerns, Chip Roy as well. And as you said, the House can only afford to lose 3 votes. And I think Mike Johnson has a really tough job here, because what happens in reconciliation is the two sides have to come to an agreement on a plan. And that plan is how they go about unlocking this process to actually do the work. So we're at the very beginning of this process right now.
So let's unpack that for just a moment, Suzanne. So the Senate only has $4 billion in cuts. The House had $1.5 trillion with
hopes for more.
With hopes for more. So how can they work within that framework? I mean, are they limited then within that framework for only $4 billion if they take the Senate?
No, and I think that's one of the points that Mike Johnson is trying to make. Look, this is just a shell. It's a skeleton. So if the two sides come together, if we agree on this skeleton moving forward, then we can make it whatever we want.
At the end. So this is just kind of like the start, what we end up at the, and this is the point the Speaker made earlier or over the weekend in the conference, as he was at the conference call with the members on Sunday, is that this is where we start, but it doesn't mean this is where we have to end up.
Absolutely not. And I think that's what Trump emphasized today in those meetings, which is that look, I can bear down on the Senate to get more cuts. In fact, a lot of the people that left the meeting said Trump assured us that we could get more than $4 billion. I think a lot of members' concerns are, well, yeah, you say you're going to cut $4 billion, but we have absolutely no assurance of that if this is the plan that's at the table.
But wouldn't the flip side be true as well, that even if they adopted the House version that calls for the 1.5 or more trillion in cuts, that doesn't guarantee that's where they end up?
No, and I think that the House conservatives in particular would like that to see be as much as $5 trillion. I mean, this.
But they're not locked into that by this framework. So it's just a starting point, a reference point. What they end up with is based on what they can get agreement to at the end of the process.
Right. And you can see both sides' point of view. Obviously, there's a lot of wiggle room in this process to do more than what's being laid out right now. As a lot of people have said, the real work starts now. We're really just getting on the train. We haven't even left the station yet. But you can also see the side of the conservatives who think that, well, that's great. You're making all these promises. How do we hold your feet to the fire when it really comes down to making these reductions? And you add to that the debt ceiling. You add to that whether the tax cuts are permanent or just an extension. There's just an incredible amount of controversial issues that at some point both sides are going to have to sit down and really hammer through, whether that's now or whether that's you pass this shell of a plan and then you come to the table later. Regardless, there's going to be hard work in negotiating on both sides. This is not where either side is going to end up. It's going to be a process. What
about Congressman Andy Harris's point yesterday on the program that, all right, we really don't need this budget resolution right now to start the process. We can go ahead and our committees can start doing this work now while we're still having a conversation about what the framework looks like.
And that's what they did in 2017. The last time the Republicans tried to do a reconciliation bill, they said, okay, we're going to punt on this issue of the resolution, the plan, the framework, which ultimately they will have to do. You can't unlock the process without it. But they went ahead and negotiated, went to their appropriators and said, hey, let's get together, let's huddle, let's see where we can make cuts. There's been suggestions of going, I think Ron Johnson was on the show last week saying we can go line by line by line and the appropriators can cut. We can talk about it. So there are many avenues with which to take with this.
I don't see at this point a way forward for this bill, for this budget resolution that came over from the Senate to pass the House this week.
No, and complicating matters is, and this is, a little inside baseball, but you have to have a rule passed before they can even get to a vote on the plan. And guess who are the gatekeepers of the rule committee? They are these very hardline conservatives who are not going to say, okay, sure, let's vote on this rule, and then it's open season on the budget resolution if they sincerely have problems and don't believe that the Senate is going to make further cuts.
And in their defense, in the defense of conservatives, rarely does something turn out more conservative than it starts in this city.
Right.
So, I mean, they have a long history of being of promises being made and not kept. And usually things turn out bigger, not smaller in this city. However, that said, let me be the other side of that coin as well. We're in the era of Trump where things are different. Much different than what they've been before.
And Mike Johnson has really benefited from having Trump to come in behind him and alongside him and say, hey, this is what I want done. You two need to work it out. Both sides need to come to the table and unify. In this situation, I really do think that Trump is the trump card. I mean, I do think that he will come in and strong-arm senators if he needs to get a little bit more just to bring the House to the table.
But that is a big difference.
Oh, absolutely. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars worth of difference.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to agree with the House that the House leadership, well, the budget chairman, Chairman Smith, this is not even, this doesn't even look reasonable. This is not a reasonable counteroffer of $4 billion.
No, and earlier today, Thune said we're speaking in completely different languages. I think he's right. Now, the Senate does have to deal with the reconciliation process itself. It does have a very complicated mechanism for getting this bill to the floor. Ultimately, it has to originate in the Senate. But at the end of the day, there's going to be no bill if they don't make some concessions.
Now, the Freedom Caucus met with the president today. The president's meeting, in fact, right now, the Republicans are gathered for an event here in D.C.
Right, and Mike Johnson was saying, look, I really hope we can get to a vote later tonight. I don't know if that's the case. If they can punt it to tomorrow, maybe they'll have more success in bringing members together overnight. But it is looking a little bleak to get something through in the next couple of days.
So what does that do with the rest of the agenda items that kind of got derailed last week?
Over the proxy voting.
Yeah, there was the proxy voting issue last week. That was a rule. That was actually a rule that brought everything to a halt. That was taken down when I think 9 Republicans joined with the Democrats to defeat that rule, which, as you said, it's, there's a lot of in-the-weeds stuff that happens here. But in order to have a floor vote, you have to adopt a rule first. That rule went down. Chances are the same thing could happen here.
Well, exactly. And you have all these bills that are waiting in the wings. I mean, the SAVE Act is on ice, which is an election integrity bill that we care very much about. A lot of things are being held up because they need to make moves very soon to get the reconciliation bill on the president's desk by Memorial Day, which is Johnson's goal. Whether that can actually happen is another conversation.
Well, I do think the urgency is there, given what has happened to the economy based on the tariffs, the certainty of the tax cuts being extended or being made permanent, I think is essential.
Well, and businesses right now are just waiting to see what is going to happen with the tariffs, what's going to happen with the tax cuts. They need to plan in advance. So I think you see the volatility in the market right now, and a lot of people are just skittish, waiting to find out what any of this means for their future.
All right, 30 seconds left. We got to go to a break. But Suzanne Bowdey, how can people keep up with this via the Washington Stand?
Sure, yes. Go to WashingtonStand.com. We've got a lot of analysis on this and other issues.
Or better yet, download the Stand Firm app, and you'll have that feed right there on the Stand Firm app. Suzanne Bowdey, always great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tony.